is Jack Heritage, practical karate instructor from the Cotswolds.
And I am Pat Woodward, amateur enthusiast and practitioner in a number of different martial arts styles.
And welcome to the Armchair Combatives podcast. Right, hello then guys. So today is quite an exciting one. So this is going to be the final episode of the season, which is going to be really cool. And today we've got a special guest on. Today's special guest has been training in martial arts for a long time. They are active within the book space, as in an author of multiple books about martial arts and self-defense, including Kid Self-Protection 2, which we're going to touch on today. Also, our special guest has a lot of experience in loads of different martial arts, which is really useful for especially some of the cross-training stuff that he currently does. So today's special guest, guys, is Mr. Jamie Clubb. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, guys. How's it going?
Very good, thank you, my man. So, if we get right into the meat of things, what necessarily inspired you to create a cross-training based martial arts gym, then stick with one or two specific styles?
Okay, well, I come from a rather eclectic background. Bottom line is, on my mother's side, long story short, 300-year-long life in, history in performance, okay, travelling performance, circus, okay, one of the biggest names in the circus world. So, many ways, grew up into eclecticism, grew up into multiculturalism before multiculturalism was a thing, if circus people were like that. So, that might be part of the influence that I had. Also, where I was based was right out in the sticks. So where we came to rest with the circus and went on into the film industry, we were stuck out right in the middle of the sticks. So there wasn't many accessible martial arts schools. Funnily enough, my celebrity interests were martial artists. Because why? Because normal celebrities we would meet when we were working on film projects and stuff like that. So they weren't really, they didn't really faze me in that respect. Whereas the martial artists were out of touch. So I decided, I began formally training martial arts in 1990. Up to that point, I was trying to train in different systems through reading books. Well, when I say different systems, I was caught onto the whole ninja boom. That's what caught me into there, and that's an entirely different avenue altogether. Okay, I'm getting to that one. But for about a year, I tried to train myself as a ninja. Eventually settled down to do what most martial artists do at the beginning of their careers, started training in a local martial arts. So I trained but of course that trained something different. And I trained Sakado, which was an offshoot. And then eventually turned into Taekwondo. Why? Because once I got my black belt, all the local clubs closed down. So I went to the nearest possible system, which was Taekwondo. Then cross-trained to kickboxing. Then into Wushu because I wanted to get back into performance, i.e. my ancestry, my background in performance. So did a martial arts act, got involved in professional wrestling, got involved with grappling off the back of some of that. Got involved in kickboxing because I wanted more realism, contacted Jeff Thompson, got involved in that. So it took me about 11 years to finally actually meet Jeff Thompson, but when I did, I trained under his personal, the guy who became his chief instructor. And then later, the guy who influenced him worked on the doors and did all that kind of background. I said I wasn't going to talk too much about my background, but actually I ended up going off into that. But it kind of laid the foundation. So when I decided I wanted to run my own club, and I'd just been doing Muay Thai and BJJ at the time, with the current systems I was studying at the time, I thought, well, I want to start with a practical system. And I actually didn't, have a base, heretic that I am. I love reading all these big in-depth articles say you have to have a base system and you need to have a base system, and I was told by lots of people you do have a base system, and I can understand that, I can absolutely appreciate that, and there are definitely advantages to having a solid base system. But my solid base system was virtually extinct by that point. And Sakado, certainly the style version I did it, the person who did stopped teaching basically. So my base, I was, homeless, martial art homeless base system as far as I was concerned. And plus, I'd got so heavily involved in eclecticism. I'd trained in so many different things. And my route was like I wanted to teach something practical, I wanted to teach something pragmatic. And at the time I thought, well, okay, I'm going to come up with my own syllabus. And it's not going to be a system, it's not going to be a style. It's going to be, I don't want to say a club, because people often confuse the club in the title as being a club, but of course it's my surname, C-L-U-B-B. So it became, but a chimera. So the idea of the chimera would be the icon. And, Chimera, again, so no allusions to Asian martial arts at all in that respect. In fact, this comes from Greek mythology, and it's a negative connotation. The Chimera is the villain in Greek mythology, who gets killed. But it was a multifaceted beast, so that was the initial allure to it. I thought, goes nicely with Clubb Chimera, until I went to Greece and found out that they pronounce it Chimera, so I blew that one out of the water. But it's all part of the lovely... my lovely embracing of uncertainty, should we say, that I brought critical thinking that comes into this. That kind of makes sense to me. I often think, well, actually, that's cool. I'm cool with that. And also the fact that everyone pronounces it, including the guy who introduced my podcast, pronounces it as Chimera. Okay, but it's not. But it's okay. But it's Chimera, and I've kept it on the podcast as well. Actually, the intro, because I'm like that. So I started a club, my own local club, and I thought, I'm going to do that. I'm going to teach it the way that I want to teach it. I taught kickboxing for 4.5 years from a rather unscrupulous instructor. Learned all that side of it, became quite cynical, I think, on the side of martial arts, which will be the basis for a novel at some point, definitely. But I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I want to teach how I want to. I want to teach everything I've learned in a practical way. And early on, I understood I needed children's classes. So I thought, well, I'll have an adults class and a children's. And because I was told all the time by people in the industry, you have to have a children's class. Children make up the majority of students in martial arts, and it's the easiest way to get into that. So I thought, well, okay, I need a kids class. But I want the kids to be doing what the adults are doing, So I thought that was the thing. And I got involved with a national payment system for martial arts, and they essentially were really helpful to me. They got me on the direct debit system, and it made all sense to me. I didn't want to do the old normal system for paying, so that went. But they also gave me some seminars and talks and coaching, and essentially they went, you don't really want to teach them self-defense. You can't teach kids self-defense, self-protection. You can't really do it. You can say it's part of what you do in martial arts, and so many people in the martial arts world went, you can't teach anyone, but these are the vulnerable members of our society. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about the times that I'd wanted self-protection in my life, and I'd wanted self-protection for other people in life, and I was teaching it to my stepkids, my stepson in particular. And I was thinking, well, no, I want to teach them that. But I thought, well, how am I going to teach children self-defense? And I thought, well, I'd gone to those martial arts classes, and I'd seen how, their games were incorporated. But these games used to not make any sense of the martial arts. It would be more a case of the fact that you go along to your local judo club, and you'd go, okay, if everyone trains really hard, we'll have a game of volleyball at the end. I thought, well, why don't you go to a volleyball club then? It's like, so, the martial arts now is like, becomes the work part of it. And I thought, well, can't you there are games that you can do, especially in judo, for example, was a classic example. That was a big letdown, because I thought, there are judo games, there was very much, way before the term ecological dynamics was around, there were actual, people were incorporating certain games. I thought, well, this is what we've got to do. We've got to put games in there. So I built this syllabus with no techniques and just principles and just situations, and had a belt system and all the rest of it. And I started with the kids, and I found out a lot of the games that I was running. I had a challenge to create games that were going to be practical, and often they're all based around chasing games. Because why? Because tactical escape made sense to me. I had to say, what do I want a kid to be doing? And they need to learn to escape, and to escape properly. So that came lay the foundations of that. And that actually had some influence over the adult training, although the execution was different. What was a fun game for the adults became this bloodfest for the adults. So areas like that started coming in. And then I ran the club for 10 years, and discovered that it really wasn't for me. I was a PT instructor and a seminar teacher. That was my area, and I found that very much on the cross training, and my ideas for cross training evolved over that particular time altogether. But yeah, essentially that was really the foundation of it. Yeah,
that's really interesting though that you say that, like with the adults.
Yeah,
like it's funny because we've incorporated stuff like this into the club as well.
Yeah,
of having pretty much the same games for the adults as we do for the kids. But like you said, there is a bit more like a bloodfest with the adults when they do it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because there's definitely similarities in there, but there's also a lot of differences in the way that you have to approach the children's self-protection in comparison to the adults. So like, what would you say is like probably the biggest difference between the two in terms of how you teach it and how you instruct it?
There's a lot of things. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, there's different age groups. I mean, at the moment we've got to have a program. The very first teacher program. I'm not mad about the term instructor, but first teacher program that I've ever certificated, and it's not complete yet. We haven't completed it, but there are online courses that people can buy, and we've had our very first seminar connected to the qualification called Animal Instincts. I run with Mary Stevens of Athena School of Karate, and Mary actually challenged me to teach younger age groups than what I'd ever taught before. We'll develop material for younger age groups, so right down to the age of 4. And what it does, it challenges you to look at like what can a child what are they actually going to take on board? So things like distancing is a big thing, because our development for understanding distance, when you're much younger, is much more difficult when you're an adult. Hence the reason why we have to teach road safety. Things that children learn in terms of distancing is a lot different. But also, children are more likely to encounter different size differentiation. So a 4-year-old is totally different to a 6-year-old in size and build. A 6-year-old is totally different to a 9-year-old. A 9-year-old to a 13-year-old. 13-year-old to a 16-year-old, etc. So you kind of got all this. Those disparities are far more significant, you find, with children. So that's one of the first things that you look at with children. Here's the other thing. An adult going into a workplace. Now imagine if you're an adult and you go into a workplace and you know that there's a 50% chance, at least a 50% chance, that you're going to have people inappropriately touching you, that you're going to encounter some form of physical violence, and you might have to get into a bit of a fight with someone to assure your dominance, okay, or to assure that you're not to be picked on, or so along those kind of lines, and that was like a general part of your everyday existence. Welcome to your first day at school. Okay, because this is just it. Because personal space for children is a big thing. Children are very tactile in the way that they're going to, how they communicate with each other, and it's part of their play. And the realms between play and something that's a bit more serious are often really blurred between children as well. So these are things that are quite different between that and adults. In some ways, children are a lot easier to teach because it's easier to get that rough and tumble. You can take rough and tumble, and you can then channel that, I think, into effective practical training. It used to crack me up. You'd get kids who turn up at a martial arts class having knocked 6 bells out of their brother, back at home, and then to do no contact or touch contact martial arts, which were supposed to be deadly. Okay, and actually what they're actually probably doing back home with their brother was probably actually more effective to actually what they're actually learning in the lesson. So my view was like, why don't we take that stuff and channel it and quarry techniques through games and through that kind of material? And so that kind of was the basis for that. But that was one of there's some of the things that were quite different between that and adults. In some ways I had to re-educate adults as being a bit like children, but in other ways I had to consider with children, this is a reality that they're facing all the time. The encounters that an adult is dealing with are the exceptions to the rule, i.e. people invading their space, people inappropriate touching, that kind of stuff. With children, this was part and parcel of their everyday. When they go off at school, when they go to school. So that was definitely a big, significant difference.
Yeah,
in teaching the two.
Yeah. I've often heard that when people talk about kids self-defense, a lot of it can be quite vapid and quite sort of almost pointless in its aspect. But I know the kind of buzzword I always hear around the topic is it's about instilling confidence in your child. What are your kind of opinions on Is it more about...
Did the sound just pick up my eye roll then?
If any of the listeners heard a grating noise, that was Jamie's eyes rolling around in his head. But no, I think well, in that very sentence, I think you kind of captured on it because so much of what I see is like, oh no, it's about giving a child the confidence. It's like, yes, but confidence without skill just means that the next time they stand up to the bullies that they will definitely face in the schoolyard, or God forbid, the creep hanging around outside the supermarket, it means they're going to get their head stoved in or worse. Yeah. And I think would you argue it's kind of about developing a certain set of skills, or as you say, more about channeling a kind of physical, let's say, confidence or...
Okay, so arbitrary sort of confidence or confidence that you just pull distribution from the sky is absolutely useless. In fact, it's dangerous. Exactly. Full stop. Apply that to just about any practical type of work, particularly one that might involve danger, and say you've got a confident worker. He actually does nothing, or she knows absolutely nothing, but they're really confident, so that. And this is often the thing people go, you will learn confidence. Confidence needs to organically grow from competence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, sorry, I've got a really good story for this.
Yeah, please.
So one of my instructors still trains with another club as well, and they had a guy come in, new student, brand new, never done martial arts in his life, and he had been in some sort of altercation in a pub or something along those lines, and he'd been in some sort of violent situation. He was like, right, I really want to do some martial arts.
Yeah.
And the club that I came from didn't teach martial arts in that way. It was an artistic expression. It wasn't practical. There wasn't that much sparring. So let's be honest here, the stuff that we were doing wasn't going to be suitable for self-defense. Anyway, my instructor Stu, he spoke to them. He was like, oh yeah, how you getting on, mate? I was like, he's like 4 weeks in and stuff. He was like, oh yeah. And bear in mind, they spent like 4 or 5 weeks just doing kicks and punches up and down the room, which, if that's what you want to do, is great. For self-defense, it doesn't work, right? And he was like, yeah, I'm much more confident now. I really feel like I can deal with something now. And it's like, you look at it like, it's just false confidence, like you said. It's something that it doesn't apply, but there's like a lack of understanding there where we think it's the same thing. Yeah. It's just like, oh yeah, because I can throw a few punches in the air, it means I can apply that straight away to a self-defense situation.
I can totally relate to that. I had a client who booked me for, again, this is the personal training. I had a client who booked me to teach essentially a kickboxing cardiovascular routine, a kickboxer exercise, if you like, along those lines. And I was all right to do that because I said, okay, we will do practical kickboxing stuff, but we're not going to be sparring. It's going to be pad work. It's going to be exercise and the rest of it. It's fine. Needed the money, man. Okay, right, okay, whatever. Okay, so, but I was like, I'm fine. I'm not, I'm not selling you anything else, along those kind of lines. So kind of like, I gave them like all the different services because it's often the case. I say to people, I do tailored services. That's my point. It's bespoke training. An instructor who actually use that as a way to describe what I did, and I love it. And as I said, I'm a bespoke teacher, I'm a bespoke trainer, and that's what I like to do. So I like to deliver because my biggest issue with martial arts has always been lying. People lie all the time about martial arts. They lie what they're going to give a person in many cases, or they try and tell them they're going to give them everything. Can you imagine buying a car that was, fastest car on the road, yet also the most economical and safest? So it just doesn't exist. Exactly. So how can you teach anything that's on the edge? You've got to know what your limitations are, but also what a person's limitations are, and what the limitations are of what you're learning as well, and where it fits in. So I had this person who said this, and they said, okay, I want to. And we basically worked it out what she and her friends wanted. So 3 of them turned up. We did about 2 or 3 sessions, and I got to the end of the 3rd session, and I heard them over talking to each other and going, "Oh yeah, tonight if something happens, we'll be able to do this, that, and the other." Went, "Oh, second guy." So I had to go straight over and go, "No. You are not doing a self-protection course in any shape or form. You're not even doing a practical martial arts thing. Okay, we're doing a fitness thing. So if you want to do that, we can do it. But this is what it entails." And this is often the case. But I'm very, very clear about this. Here's the thing. I'm known for teaching self-protection. I've got a self-protection book on children. I've got a self-protection course on children's self-protection. all my corporate work is self-protection. And I take it very, very seriously. And I've got people like Mo Teague and Jeff Thompson, in my pedigree, that taught me, and Steve Templey with the QAP stuff, the knife awareness stuff, edge weapon awareness stuff. So I've got all that kind of thing. So that part of it's there, but I am absolutely in line with what they teach. I keep that sectioned off from martial arts. Martial arts can help, enhance, improve self-protection, but I teach it very, very separately, I teach it completely like that. And to me, that's the healthiest way to run it, because there is no one's under any misconceptions, and to understand what you're doing. So when it comes back to the competence part of it, that you're talking about, this competence part of it altogether, you need to be competent in something and understand what you're competent in as well, because there's this byproduct myth. Title of one of my essays in my Mordred's Victory book, quick plug there. But the byproduct myth, which kind of comes from the wax on, wax off idea, which honestly I love as a story. Honestly, I do love it as a story. And they've got other variations of it, which honestly I love it. And sometimes in some respects I like it. I do like the idea of learning stuff without really learning it. But a lot of it, you've got to know what you're learning, what the point of what you're learning is doing in order to make something work. work properly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just that is generally the most effective way to teach people, to be very specific about what it is and be absolutely honest about what
Yeah.
it is. Because here's the thing, people talk about pragmatism and realism and functionality and stuff like that. I mean, Jack, you're a PT instructor as well.
Yeah.
You're a PT. You're a PT.
Yeah.
Personal trainer. We don't need any other extra words to that. Okay, you're a PT. Okay, so it's so you know like how badly the term functional fitness has ended up becoming. You know, in terms of like what functional, what the fuck does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, just phrase your PG-13.
I know,
We're explicit.
we put the explicit logo on. So
You're fine.
Okay. Oh, off we go then.
Get ready.
Yeah, exactly. So with that in mind, and with that kind of thing in mind, you need to be absolutely specific about what you want to be learning, and in order to get that competence and to be assured of that as well. So the byproduct myth puts the idea that you learn something, then therefore you get more confident. Because honestly, this was going back to the beginning when I was running my club, and I saw this conflict I was having with what the normal corporate way of running a martial arts club was, and how it was totally out of whack with what I was doing, and what I wanted to do. I was told, well, look, you don't have to worry about it. They're learning martial arts. Martial arts will make them more confident. When you're more confident, you'll be less likely to be targeted. Therefore, good self-defense. Okay? No, not at all. No, it doesn't. It's like confidence. If you have confidence in something that you're not competent in, that can be really, really dangerous for how humans' behaviour is going to be. And there's plenty of examples of that. As I said, apply it to any other type of work or profession or sport or anything along those lines, and you'll get the same answer. Yeah, well, build confidence up. It's not good enough, and it needs to be. No. You need to be competent in something in order to be confident.
Yeah, fully. I mean, it goes back to like going back to your PT work, Jack. Obviously, you've got the PT work, you've got the martial arts teaching, and kind of in the middle, the kind of centre point is, I know you run kind of specialised pad work training, but it's alongside your PT work and not alongside the martial arts. I know you're using it as a sort of
it's my
see what we do.
It's a gateway drug.
It's my It's like if you could try this, you'd love it.
But see, this is the thing. Like if somebody was doing your pad work class, you wouldn't look at them and say like, you are now effectively learning you're effectively learning how to strike, but you're not learning any of the esoterica that goes around it and kind of power generation and where things go. And
that's exactly it. And it's we talk about functionality. It's like functionality for what?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much the thing. It's like, functional training is only functional if it's functional for the thing you're trying to be functional at.
Yeah,
that's probably the best way to put it. Yeah. So it's like, as pad work as an example, my idea is I get people to hit things for fitness.
Yes.
That's all it's about. And like ideally, because I've got a martial art background, they're not hitting it like absolute idiots.
No.
That's the only kind of goal I've got going in.
Yeah.
And it's like I'll teach them a few basic kicks, a few basic punches, and then that'll be enough for them to go, hey, look, I've got a sweat on, happy days, and I've got to hit some stuff and I feel good about myself.
Yeah.
Great, that's all I care about. But like Jamie said, it's exactly the same thing. If somebody was to go, oh, God, I'm ready to take on people now, I'll be like, no, no, you're not.
Now I'm about to use a term that if my co-creator of the Animal Instincts program will probably have to take a shot now because she always waits when this is going to turn up. Okay, toxic positivity. Okay. So the positive, and this has something to do with the whole competence thing, because that is the ultimate end of bad confidence instilling, right? The dangerous installation of confidence. Its ultimate extreme or its engine, if you like, is toxic positivity. Now, this invaded the self-defense, self-protection world, right? The idea, I saw this coming from, and I've had colleagues who teach this area and so the rest of it, but obviously, we're all grown-ups here, so we can have our debates and discussions. But the people who dress you up in the old 1950s alien suits, okay, the impact sort of the bullet men, stuff like that, right? They often have a thing where somebody will rush at them at the end. And they call it a pressure test. I'd call it a pressure ordeal at best, okay? Technically, it's a pressure test, but for me, I like to use the term pressure test to mean pass-fail, right? To me, that's a test for something, pass-fail. A pressure ordeal is more like you're enduring something. Do you know what I mean? It's like do as many press-ups until you can't do any more press-ups. Do as many burpees you can't do.
Work to failure.
It's pressure. You're under pressure. You're putting things under pressure, but you're but it's an ordeal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's an ordeal.
Yeah.
It couldn't be inoculation, stress and so on. And to me, that kind of bullet man kind of thing usually is, because as one coach, European representative of it actually at the time, who came to one of our seminars, pointed out to me, the bullet man never wins. Right? The bullet man never wins, and it's kind of dawned on me, thinking, shit, this is not a change from the red man suits or the rest of it, because it looks at the different sort of protective gears that we can do for self-protection, and how can we work it to make it more realistic and under full contact conditions. And the bullet man was the ultimate version of it, because you could hit a person pretty hard without worrying about concussions and stuff like that, because of the head stabilisation and all that kind of it. But then I started to realise, well, I haven't seen anybody in these things losing to these bullet men. They're swearing and shouting and doing all the usual, pantomime, if you like, of self-protection, the pornography of reality-based self-defence, as I once called it. That kind of thing's there, and they've got people cheering them on, because it came connected with this positive affirmation movement, if you like.
Yeah.
Okay, because positive thinking, self-help has always been a part of, well, it hasn't always been a part of martial arts. Let's not kid ourselves, but it's been around since pretty much the earliest days of self-help. People noticed good ways to integrate that into martial arts and to work into martial arts, often to its detriment, and sometimes to its benefit. Bear in mind, Jeff Thompson is one of my teachers, and certainly a person who I reference all the time. And was very much on the self-help movement. But I've seen the damage as well that self-help can offer, coming in the form of positive thinking sometimes. This positive thinking that doesn't allow for any negative thinking, let alone realistic thinking.
Yeah.
This whole and I remember hearing somebody actually making an almost political statement at a Kawap instructor course that I was on, where he wasn't a Kawap, he was supposed to go for the same qualification as me, so he was another teacher, if you like, and he came from that background, and he went, no. The client must always have a positive experience. They must always win. We do not teach a negative experience for that. And you've got people cheering you on to do that and going, what actually are you replicating here? How does where does that align with everything like that? And that then comes into, so think of the worst case situation here now. So now you think you are totally competent at doing that, because you've got people, when you haven't got the cheering crowds, when you haven't got somebody who's just going to fall over when you hit them, and all those number of things like that.
You say that, and it's interesting, because I've heard instructors and stuff that talk about, you want to give positive affirmations, especially for kids. And stuff. Do you want them to come back? And as a business, great, make them feel good about themselves and keep them coming. Which I can see why people do it as a marketing thing. But it's like you say, there's a danger to that as well, in terms of it's once again goes back to that false confidence. They think, oh yeah, I'm bloody brilliant at this. Oh great, all I get is these positive affirmations. So one of the things I think was I can't remember exactly who I heard it from, but they said a really good thing for especially teaching kids and adults really is, yes, give them something positive that they've done in that session and tell them what they've done well. That was brilliant. But you should also give them something that you can critique and they can work on.
100%.
Because then at least they're going home with two things. They're not going home thinking that I'm Billy Big Bollocks and I'm doing everything perfectly. They're going home feeling good about themselves, but they're also going home going, okay, there's still things I can work on. And I think that's really important for kids.
I had a single child client back in the days when I was running a club. Peter Constantine put him in contact with me. Parents were having serious problems with bullying. This child was, and it wasn't the only one that he put in contact with me. And I've had these incidents before when I've had to do. I say most of my teaching these days is martial arts when it comes to PTs, and all my seminar work is self-protection. But I do occasionally get these people who come out and they actually, what they want is self-protection, and I do offer it. And this situation this kid was facing, and it wasn't the only one that I've come across with this, was where the parents were at the stage where they went, the best we can do now, if we don't teach our child some decent physical skills, have him teach some proper physical skills, is to keep moving to another schools. But these bullies are going to keep manifesting themselves, and I don't feel that, I feel this is a stage now at the moment, this is not going to be practical for anybody, and I feel that, we can do it. And they said, well, okay, well, number one, you have to have the parents on board. That's something that's a lesson I learned early. Again, trial and error, all the rest of it. Make sure parents are on board. It's a big part of it. It's why even in the Animal Instincts program, we even have a parents only one. It's not for instructors or anything. It's for parents to do this, because the parents on the same page. It's cool, because we want to have that when your child is facing the head teacher. And they've been involved in an altercation and they've had to defend themselves, that the parents know that their child is actually doing that, defending themselves, And when disciplinary actions go into, no, my child's defending themselves, not retaliating, they're defending themselves. So we want to make sure parents are on board. So anyway, but back to this thing. So one of the tests that I had this child do was go up against my stepson. I remember this from the first one, who was about a year or so older than this kid, and far more experienced. And what they were going to do is they were just going to be on the mats, and all this kid had to do was fight to get to their feet. Okay, started from standing, but I knew he was going to get taken down. Okay,
yeah.
And the kid was permitted far more than my stepson to be able to do things. Okay, they were allowed to bite and go for stuff like, I said there was a good age difference between the two, and my stepson was very used to. He was 13 actually at the time, and he was sparring with the adults, so he was pretty cool with that part of it. And it lasted for 10 minutes or so with this kid on the ground, just continuously fighting with his father there the whole time.
Yeah.
As far as the affirmations are concerned, we were there encouraging him, fight, do this, keep going, don't give in, do this, that. There were plenty of positions that my stepson naturally put him into where he had to kind of tap pretty much.
Yeah.
But the point was that you have to continue. You tap, but you can stop. It's like the whole thing, isn't it? It's like when you push somebody when you're doing endurance training. It's like the idea you can stop. Sorry, you can rest, but you don't have to necessarily don't stop. You don't quit. You can stop and don't quit. So that was the whole point. Was like him to keep doing. So ultimately, you could look at that and say, on a pass-fail basis, he failed. Mm-hmm. He wasn't going to win that. I knew he wasn't going to win that. But here's the thing: when that kid stood up, I was saying, you just spent 10 minutes on the mat against an experienced other pupil who's older than you, stronger than you. Now, how old are these other kids you're facing and the trouble you're doing like that? And the kid's like, now you talk about competence from confidence. Now, he didn't win technically.
No, at all.
The feedback I got back from the parents was that this kid was not being bullied anymore, and he hadn't had to do any physical altercations with the other kids. The difference is now is that practicing the old Theodore Roosevelt talk quietly but always carry a big stick, he was able to hold his fence line. He was able to keep his distance from people who are antagonising the bullies with the absolute confidence that if things were going to go down, there was no way those kids could do anything to him like he just experienced there, in that kind of thing. Yeah. So, and I'd had other things. Well, one of my clients, classic example, one of my clients had, technically had never won a submission grappling spar, if you like. Talk about can't win at practice, can you? But you know what I mean? But essentially, he'd never tapped me, whatever, never really won on points, when we'd done submission grappling and that. One of his mates, he was out with one of his mates, and one of his mates decided, have a bit of a game, tackled him, took him to the ground, right, gave him a quick tackle, went, like that, took him by surprise. He immediately bucked him straight off, turned him over, and put him into a pin, like that, without him thinking about it. And he technically never won a sparring situation. But yet this guy was he totally dominated this other person. It was so easy. So the guy didn't have any positional control on top. And when I pinned him, he was done. And he knew he was done as well. And so this lie about saying, you've got to keep getting the positive experience. No. It's like making sure it's how you coach it and teach it. Yeah. You don't teach it like, you're rubbish, all the rest of that. You said, you give them the positive feedback. So that's where the positivity does work. Yeah. Look what you've done. Look what you've achieved. Yes. But the best thing is that you know about that. See, when a client lands a left hook on me, I smile, not because I'm a masochist, okay, but because I'll say to them, no, I tried to stop you from landing that hook, I was too slow. You pulled it off. No one can take that away from you. I can't say to you, your form was a bit rubbish, your foot was a bit out of order, and all the rest of that. You landed that. And if you did it against another client, you did it as well. They didn't give it you, You could go, okay, we're sparring light, we're blah, any number of those things. But the bottom line is, I was trying to stop you from doing something, and you did it. So it's kind of like all those kind of lines. So exactly. So that really is, in many ways, I think it's becoming our sort of theme of this discussion. It's like being honest. Yeah, exactly. And it works better for people.
Exactly, and being honest with how you teach people. I think people pick up on it as well. I generally think that people stay with you longer as a student or even as a parent. Like you said, being on side with the parents is so important. Even with what I do. Yes. One of the things that I got told, which I was really happy about, was you've got really good communication with the parents. And I think it's super important because if your kid's having a problem and stuff, you need to be dealing with that from the top.
Yes.
First, then speaking to the kid. Okay. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I thought I'd kind of like something you mentioned earlier was about like your quarry techniques,
Yes.
and you're trying to kind of like build principles opposed
Yes.
to building techniques, and I think that's really important for the self-protection side of things too.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, not everybody comes into martial arts
Yeah.
wanting like a full black belt
Yeah.
system. They just
Yeah.
want enough
Yes.
to be able to help them in self-defense, which
Yes.
obviously, like you
Yes.
probably say, is not the best way of doing it.
No,
You're
no.
better off just learning self-defense.
Yes.
But it'd be interesting to hear your opinion on how you use that kind of quarrying of principles opposed to teaching, here's a technique.
Okay, so very simply, I can use examples for this for both martial arts and self-protection.
Yeah.
So if you're doing self-protection, self-defense being the hard skills of self-protection, okay, you just do a chase game, an example of chase game. Everything from build-up tag. So if you do build-up TIG or bulldogs or whatever you want to call it, tag TIG, well, basically. That game is like a real great warm-up game, and I always use it as a good, because it immediately teaches evasion skills, it teaches people to escape, and the secret here is to anchor that with what are you learning here. So when people do those games, do the game, but then at the end of the game, immediately ask them, what do you reckon you could get from that experience? And then you go, and so he starts off with all fitness and all gets sweat on, it's warm up, blah blah blah, and you go, yeah, great. What do you think specifically? But you may have noticed we're not a fitness club. What did you get from this? Okay, how's this going to help with self-protection? Oh, escape. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now we're getting so we're understanding escape now. Okay, people who were doing the tigging, who did you pick on? Who did you find out? So now we're getting this positive feedback come back from here. Oh, I went for the smaller ones. Okay, now we get some honesty now. This whole thing. Guess what? If you're smaller, you're going to get likely to be picked on. Okay, the ones that are on their own, right? You know what I mean? This kind of thing. And then you start layering it into other games. Like we have a game called Strategy 1 versus Strategy 2, or Predator versus Prey, where essentially you get a bunch of people wearing protective gear, play the roles of the predators, and to begin with, their job is just to basically grab hold of people for 5 seconds, count to 5, and the other person will do everything they can in order to escape from the hold. You layer that on into, okay, well, we'll have 2 minutes of the people wearing the predator stuff, giving dialogue, getting familiar, getting close, getting into people's areas, getting people used to them touching them, etc., all this kind of thing coming up. So then you can start, building up proper self-protection scenarios. And also, and then you shorten the time, 5 seconds to 3 seconds, all this kind of thing. And then constantly keep bringing back the feedback, both from the predator's perspective and from the prey's perspective. You keep feeding this back in, and then that then goes back into the training. But from that, from a physical point of view, you'll note, and I noticed this from very early on, that primal grappling comes out of positions. Good escape, procedures, things that people use, like keeping their backs to the walls and things like that, which you then can cultivate into other games where you go, okay, try and tag the back. So that then teaches people things like keeping their back away from people to protect their back. And then we can, and so that quarries, and then you can then refine those, you can sculpt those, if you like, into more effective techniques. And the best way to do that is through a series of different games. You make the games almost like a series of Russian dolls, or a sculpting process, if you like. Refine it. Make the game, put more constraints into the game now. So we isolate and focus on a certain area, and keep doing that. Martial arts, well, I think one of the best goals in martial arts, one of the things that I don't always achieve because I still supplement it with other areas of training, but it's definitely a goal, I think, for martial arts, is to be able to create live practices where people learn the techniques from the practice. So that you learn a technique. Why? Because it works. And guess what? You've learnt it yourself. You haven't been told to do it. And if you learn something yourself, you create ownership. You have ownership of a technique, you're more likely to do it. It's like this whole thing about, you think about how many things in martial art training and self-protection training about, any sort of any training that teaches form of combatives, you think of the possible negative connotations of that. Get your stance right, okay? So what happens when you're under fear? Freeze, yeah? Fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Yeah.
One of your the normal, synaptic response. So you get that, freeze. Get your stance right. You're starting off going, okay, we're teaching people to stand still. Training them to stand still, to do their techniques from standing still. Okay. Now, I can guarantee you, any form of combat that you do, unless you are making those people put their feet inside clay boots or something like that, they are going to move. Yeah. How many times submission grappling when you have a huge hall, and yet you'll always find the wall, won't you? Yeah, you know, no matter how much space you've got, you go, how the hell did we get here?
Because
they travel, fights travel.
I suppose that brings into a question I'd kind of really like to get your 2 cents on specifically. So, like, obviously, you talk about your predator prey game. People have like your protective gear on and things like that. And you talk about the bullet man.
Yeah.
So something that we've kind of touched on in previous episodes, and it's always been a big source of contention, is there such a thing as real enough? So you have kind of, these guys in protective gear, they're going to be able to hang on to the prey players or the strategy players longer because if you've got a head guard on, you can get hit in the head more. You won't feel the same kind of pain response. So it's kind of, in your experience, obviously like technique quarrying, as you've called it, is kind of the main focus, but is that still, again, real enough? If the assailants, the predators, want to call them, are still kind of decked out in their protective gear, they're still understanding of like, nobody's going to actually take my head off because we're all still in this kind of learning environment. Is there such a thing as real enough?
Yes, there is. Okay, and it can be done through, again, Ian Abernethy calls it the training matrix. So ultimately you have to identify where the flaws are in your exercise. So whatever exercise you're doing, you've got to identify where are the flaws. What are we doing here that's stopping people from going to hospital and enabling us to continue training? Okay, and then you have to then address that in another separate activity. And the idea is that you then end up creating a Venn diagram where in the middle of it you've actually got something that's close enough to resemble self-protection training. I mean, think about how soldiers are trained. The most they can do is like an extreme version of paintball, when they're out in the field without actually killing people, But it's so, and then they put them into battle, and but they have to do, they're going to have to do that. They don't actually kill anybody. I mean, they sometimes have people like stabbing carcasses and all the rest of it, and you've got any number of different stuff like that. But the bottom line is that they can only go so far with that. So the way to do that. Now, here's the other issue. Hard sparring, okay, even in martial arts, with the stuff we know about CTE now, and also with the sort of people we're training as well, so you've got to decide, okay, so what sort of gym are you? Are you training people to fight in the ring? Okay, so
sorry, just expanding that acronym. CTE.
Okay, so that's the brain damage essentially. And what we know about brain damage, cumulative brain damage, so it's over a period of time. So you've got, you take a
Okay, so this is Jamie speaking from the future on one of his dog walks to give the definition for the acronym that Patrick rather kindly put me on the spot for. Thanks for that, Pat. It's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's what CTE stands for. And as I said, it's used to refer to accumulative brain damage.
It's not just heavy concussions, okay? It's also cumulative concussions as well. Bottom line is, your brain cells die; they don't grow back. So that's just it. So you can't go to conditioning. That's why any. I mean, I'm sure there's none of your listeners are necessarily in favour of any of this, but there are gyms that have people where the instructor lets people stand there and they take headshots, it's utter nonsense, and they put it down as conditioning. I mean, I've got my views on conditioning as well. I think conditioning works only so far, but we just did a private lesson just now. We were talking about that, saying certain degree of conditioning is fine, but really after a certain point, does it really matter? It should not just come out in sparring. Should it not just come out just through regular practice? You're never going to deaden your nerves completely in any part of your body. So it's like, all you're going to do is get used to it to a certain degree. And certainly with what we know about head trauma. So you don't have to do heavy sparring or even really heavy pressure testing to a certain degree. I think it's important to have in self-protection to have an experience where it feels very real, so you actually get the visceral experience of the reality, and that's why grappling is so good, because you can use grappling to really enforce that. But the bottom line is you can't replicate reality, and what I find is that the closer people get to replicating reality, actually the further away they get from actually doing anything that's physically effective, because you can go and say, right, okay, no protective equipment, we're going to do it in whatever scenario you want to do, and this stuff can very quickly deteriorate into a drama class. It's what I often see. It's like a sort of stage arranging that you get in martial arts. And okay, we're going to do it in a bar. We're going to do it in a toilet. We're going to do it in a cubicle. We're going to do it here. We're going to do it. We're going to do it on ice, we do it on the tarmac, we're going to do it like that. And the trouble is with all these things, the concessions you have to make in those environments sometimes get so far that you're going, we're just doing compliant shit now.
We're just doing compliance.
Yeah,
I had a bit of a weird experience. So I went out to meet some friends recently, and we all kind of met up in this sort of big multi-story car park.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, I know that, I've never been here before.
Yeah.
So I'm doing my kind of soft skills. I'm looking around, just going, like, have a look at the car. Is there anybody around? I maybe want to find a different spot. Also, like, looking for my friends. We go over, we talk, see one of them, we get hugging and seeing each other. This is excellent. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here with you. And my other friend thinks he's being funny, and he comes up behind me and he tackles me.
Yeah.
And straight away, there's that instant thought process in my head of, like, someone's just tackled you. You're in a place you don't know.
Yeah.
Straight away, my stance drops. Straight away, I get hands on him.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of, but I don't know if it. Well, I suppose I'll put it to the room. There's also that thing of, I'm not immediately kind of throwing him over my hip because I want to assess. Like, I know I'm waiting for a second friend.
Yeah.
Has my friend decided to be funny, or am I being attacked by a group of thugs? Because if I take my friend, who's a bit smaller than me, and a bit lighter than me, and I throw him over my hip and I slam his back down onto these concrete steps, that's going to make me feel awful. Yeah, sure. But at the same time, if this is a group of thugs, he's going down those stairs and So is it kind of? So again, that's the kind of, that is where you kind of again have the concessions of, you have to be aware of your environment, because we are in the Clubb Chimera stable at the minute. We've got these nice padded floors we're all sitting on. We've got these nice padded walls. You're never going to find that outside of this environment. So if somebody does come up and tackle you, and you throw them down onto the asphalt and they end up with road rash, how's that going to look on you? And it kind of becomes, as you say, there becomes a certain point where it becomes an improv class and not a self-protection class. Yeah,
I don't think it's a bad idea to put people into different scenarios and stuff. But I just think it's often overplayed. That's my view, because you can't replicate every single possible scenario, and the trouble with that, it becomes a sort of dilution process. So what you end up doing is like, scenario of the week, and you get crap at them all, because you just do too many of them. We could spend forever talking about different scenarios. Much better to find an environment where you can train against fully resistant opponents, fully resistant training partners, in a safe. It is a safe environment, but then you also got to be wary of the changing of the certain environments. So put it this way: my money's still going to be on the individual who has trained against in live scenario situations in a safe environment, but they're live, fail-win situations, over anybody who's done compliant drilling on asphalt and in that kind of situation. You put them in, and you kind of find that why? Because the amount of mat time that you can put into that and actually live things. And people find this is like, there's the weird things that people find, like when you get a bare knuckle boxer, fighting a professional boxer, so both of them in the respective positions, right? Even a middling professional boxer is going to beat in a standoff facing your average top bare knuckle fighter. Why? Because the professional boxer is doing it as a job, day in, day out, refining their skills, and they're not incurring the injuries, so they get to practice more, so they get to train more as well. Whereas the bare knuckle fighter, at best, even the top champions aren't doing it as a living. So they're not doing it every day, and so it's like that. And of course, bare knuckle fighting today is not the same as what it was in the pre-gloved era. It's a total different. It's effectively just boxing. It's boxing without the gloves on. Yes, it's hard. It's got a hardier element to it and stuff like that. But your hands break easier because you're not wearing wraps. We sometimes do wear wraps. You do wear wraps in a lot of bits of that. I'm not saying it's not an incredibly tough sport and all the rest of it. Of course, it's not. But compare it to somebody who is doing this as a profession, as their job, in a refined environment, and the way they're training, again, is safer a lot of the time, but they're getting the more miles in, they're getting the more experience in order to do that in that kind of live environment. The bare knuckle fights, what sparring are they doing? Most of the time, if they can do any sparring, will be with gloves on. They're not going to spar each other with bare knuckles all the time. You know what I mean? It's like, because of the injuries and stuff that you pick up. So you've got to kind of make that trade-off when it comes to things like that. And again, I would say use the training matrix. That kind of is my view. People go, our stuff's mega realistic and all the rest of it. And you go, yeah, but it's compliant. And if it's compliant, it doesn't really matter, because you're not used to actually training against someone stopping you from doing it, So it's, you tend to, hence the reason, why so many people successfully involved in security tend to have had backgrounds in a lot of live practice areas. I don't make the distinction of saying, I'm not from this whole family of people who go, sport, because there is this sort of postmodernist view where you're going, if you do a martial arts sport, that's enough for self-defense, because again, you are training for a specific environment, different area. The dynamic of a self-protection situation is different to a sporting environment as well. So I'm not going to go into that. But what sports give you, though, is this tremendous area to pull information to refine what you do.
Yeah.
Here's the classic example, the left hook, right? So a left hook is a technique that John Awesome Anderson used more times than not when he was defending himself on the doors working Coventry in the 1980s and 90s, okay? I think early 70s as well. Okay, but he had a massive reputation in Coventry, when Coventry was one of the most violent cities of its kind. And he's a guy who taught Jeff Thompson, and I trained with him for a short period of time. And he had this amazing left hook, and it was really, really tight punch, okay? And it's a lead hand shot, and he'd line it up with a fence in a certain way. So tight that the story is that he knocked a guy out, and they congratulated the other doorman for doing it. They stood by him because it was that tight. The punch was that tight, and I've experienced it on the pad, and it's something else. It was an amazing shot, and how he be able to deliver it was great. Now, what if I told you that the left hook, as a refined punch like that, you won't find it anywhere in martial arts combative before the implementation of mufflers as a full-time thing in boxing. And in fact, we've got stuff in the 19th century, towards the end of the 19th century, of people criticising the use of gloves, the old school going when the gloves are being introduced. Oh, it's introducing bad technique. People are throwing punches using the inside of the glove and stuff. They're slapping and stuff like that. Before that point, you had like swinging haymakers, which aren't hooks, okay? No. They're not hooks. The only thing they share in common is the rotational thing of the thing, but they're not as refined as hooks. So what you've ended up happening is that the sport of boxing has developed the left hook through the use of wearing gloves, because they've become more sophisticated. Grappling has been chucked out, and then people have focused on punching. It's all become about knocking somebody out, okay, and all those kind of things, rather than just taking somebody down, as you'd have found with the old bare knuckle fighting. And you've now got a refined punch now, which now then finds its way back into self-protection. So it's actually found itself right back down there. That wouldn't have happened without that development. It's the same with like stuff with the groundwork as well. For ages we've got this people disregarding groundwork. I did a 2-part podcast, and currently at the time of doing this, I'm re-recording the second part of it. But it's, the raw form is out there on my podcast called The Way of the Shark, all about specifically sort of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and ground fighting, and all about how we've gone through phases with that. Now, we have got stuff from the 19th century of British boxers and wrestlers as well criticising ground fighting, really hating it, and criticising it as self-defence, actually saying you should actually wait for someone to get back up on their feet in a self-defence situation, actually saying this, So, that's there, and there was a real issue with it. It was definitely a bit of Francophobia going on there, because Greco-Roman wrestling, of course, is French, despite its name. It's actually French, and they didn't like that. They thought it was being like a type of dog fight, people fought on the ground, so they're all against that. Kano Jigaro, with his Newaza aspect of judo, didn't like ground fighting. This is the thing that people don't... again, look, and to this day, judo, because of trying to make a distinction from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, emphasises even more about the throws now. It's even more than ever, it's about the throws. But that kind of cycling back to its creators, who kind of begrudgingly allowed Newaza. Why? Because it was what was best, allowing them to definitively defeat the other jiu-jitsu school. When they were competing with the other jiu-jitsu schools and winning the contracts, they were definitively defeating them on the ground. So we've kind of gone through this process with ground fighting, where people have and it took the UFC in many respects for people to start respecting it massively, hugely. And you've got this huge, and then the whole, juggernaut that became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and that took off because of a lot off the base, and it became its own thing. And if you look at it now, the ground now has become the most sophisticated area. Interestingly and ironically, Kano regarded it as too simple compared to the other fighting. The ground game was the simplest area. She thought it was just too simple. It was close to children play fighting. Coming back to our quarrying, which we see, children fighting on the ground and rolling around. But now,
coming back to the Afghan kids wrestling,
Tagumi, Tagumi in karate, absolutely, which is again is an interesting perspective as well, which we were talking about with you in developing the syllabus. But it's interesting that you find now that ground fighting now is actually probably the most sophisticated range. A Brazilian person who does Brazilian jiu-jitsu, on average now, it takes me. I thought it was 9 years because my coach took 9 years, but it's actually about 15 years to get a black belt. Compare that to judo, which takes about 4 years. Now. So now it's this ground, and why? Now ground, we've got so many different variations of guards. You've got entire programs just based off single locks. You've got the Kimura program, multi-volume program.
It's crazy how much there is. Like Sensei Seth did a really good video on this where he tried to calculate how many techniques there were in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I can't remember the result. You'd have to watch the video, but I think it was something like ridiculous, like over 10,000. Or something like that. It was something absolutely astronomical.
I remember having I had a conversation with a BJJ player recently where he was kind of telling me all about like the Gracie Expo in the 40s, where they invited over. They basically put this kind of worldwide missive out, basically saying like, come to Brazil, come and do our ground fighting with us, and we guarantee we'll beat you. And loads of people turned up, and they all got trounced. And the thing that I could tell he was in a bit of a rhythm, and I could tell it would have been a much longer conversation if I had said this. But I remember kind of thinking as he was saying this, kind of like, well, if you take like a karate guy from Japan, and you take a Muay Thai fighter from Thailand. If they hear there's this brand new BJJ system, it's ground fighting only, come and see what they're going, and they go along thinking they're going to win, straight away those guys don't understand what they've been asked to do. Because you take somebody who does a stand-up art, you take somebody who does something with the hands and the feet specifically, or the elbow fighting, and you say like, right, now let's get down on our hands and knees and we'll have a ground fight, and they think they're still going to win based on that. They don't understand themselves and they don't understand what they're doing. So I think it was a great marketing technique almost, because the Gracies could then say, well, our system beat all these fantastic famous players from all over the world, and but at the same time it was like, how egotistical do you have to be to think that your stand-up system of punches and kicks translates into ground wrestling and still comes out on top.
The thing that I find interesting as well, when you actually look at it and you put it into like a self-defense context with that kind of thing, it's like, you've got karate guys, you've got Muay Thai guys, all of that, anybody within that space, and you say, okay, we're going to put you in, and we're just going to get you to fight. And like, let's just say there's not many rules. You guarantee that although they start on striking, it always ends up in some form of grapple. It always ends up in some sort of grappling position, because eventually you're gonna overshoot and you're gonna end up really, really close to somebody. Well, it even happens in boxing. They always end up in some sort of clinch, and then the ref have to come in and break them, and they try to do their dirty shots while they're doing all that fun stuff. So it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how sophisticated your art is doing one thing, you're always going to find yourself moving into another area that you might not be specifically training. And I think this is why in self-defense especially, we need to make sure that we're not only focusing on, all you need to worry about is a good strike. All you need to worry about is a good kick or a good... You need to be doing a little bit of everything. And this is why, personally, that's why I really like karate. And especially when you look back at what karate used to be. It's holistic. And there's a little bit of everything. Like, by no means are we experts on the floor. Like, far from it. We're not experts at grappling. We're not experts at striking in comparison to boxers. We've got a little bit of everything. And I think for me, that helps, at least what I do, translate a little bit more to self-protection. Because I feel like, at least I feel a little bit more confident against an everyday Joe that doesn't have any grappling experience or any striking experience. I'd like to think, especially with the drills we do, like Jamie was talking about some of the games he plays and stuff. Like we do some of those drills and we think they're fantastic. They're really, really good, and they help hone some of those basic skills of fencing and understanding boundary setting and escape skills and stuff. And when you've got that with the other striking things that you already do, or any of the grappling work you do, it becomes quite an easy translation to do those things live. And we find it really works. And I think, if you had that in just boxing, and all you were teaching is only striking, and then you're like, now do self-defense. It doesn't work.
No, but that's exactly, and again, it's a discussion that I was having with you before. I mean, again, there's a thing that I call welding, which is a dangerous type of cross training, and you see it. Fair enough, I used to see it with a fair number of JKD teachers, to be honest. And I'd have to say they were caving into public demand. The idea was like, okay, I want to come in with a boxing entry, switches to Panatukan, then to a wrestling takedown, and then finish it off with a nice BJJ submission, etc. Okay, and then we can add maybe a bit of weapons on that. And we do these big elaborate combinations. And I often, and to be honest, you get people who become like pad work monkeys as well. And you've seen them where they hit the pads. And it goes off on this massive tangent with the pad. And you go, I'm forgetting, what's the pad representing at the moment here? Is it his head? Is it his arm? Is it a you know what I mean? You often see these ones, and they do these big takedowns, often like a long big takedown, going, and how many times are you going to drill that? And then how long do you drill that before you start getting tired and your brain starts making shortcuts and your technique goes rubbish? Yeah. Okay, rather than actually bringing it out from a live test. So you kind of have that too. But here's the thing: we talk about the welding, what I call welding. Okay, so because just as I talked about how the left hook came in from boxing and stuff like that, and I talked about the ground fighting. Again, the point here with the ground fighting is that you don't need to master all that sophistication on the ground in order to make yourself even a good MMA fighter. There's MMA champions nowadays that not. At one point there was a time when they all had a black belt in BJJ as well as part of one of the things of that. It's not people have broken that now as well. There's a requisite of that because as BJJ's evolved as well and etc. etc. But people found different things, stuff like that. But it's more to do with getting a familiarity that you get there. Your self-protection needs to be very narrow, to be honest. It's got to be very narrow, very principle-based. But it's the experiences that you get from it that are going to enhance what you do. So you would learn how to box. Now, my view is that you have like a line. Okay, and so if you're a single objective path, it's a 10-hour course. Okay, and that should be enough to learn self-protection. That was some homework. Why? Because if you went first aid, it'd be the same thing. In my view, it's the same thing. Because and it's, if you can't deliver it that way, then there's a problem because there's the inefficiency, because it's the average person who's coming here. The person who's coming to you is not necessarily a soldier, someone who's going to work the doors, it's a person who's going to be involved in law enforcement, any number of things. The majority of people who are going to want to learn self-protection, the majority of people who need self-protection are what? They're retail workers, they're couriers, they're housewives, they're house husbands, they're stay-at-home dads, they're secretaries, they're administrators, they're kneeling accounts. People who don't go, look, I don't need to know this, ages-long martial arts system and everything like that. I'm just basically going from my place at work to home on the tube, and I'm actually fucking terrified. Can you do something about that? I want to learn something that is honest and not big confidence boost. Confidence from competence. Teach me something within that. That doesn't have to be a lifelong pursuit. And we should be able to do that because we can do that with first aid, which is life-saving skills. You're telling people you're a first responder. This person's life is in your hands, and you're doing this. But you're not a paramedic, and you're not a heart surgeon, but you're still going to learn CPR. Still going to learn, So there's these kind of things that are. So for me, for self-protection, and that's our challenge that we need to do. We need to tell them you've got to do homework, and you need to tell them that you've got to learn behaviours. That's how good self-protection is. It's layered on behaviours. That's the important thing. Things that you're not going to close that door and go, okay, that was a good lesson and now I'm going to get on the rest of my life. You're going to close that door and go, okay, well now I'm going to have better situational awareness. I'm going to have more self-awareness in terms of managing fear and things like that. I'm going to be better at de-escalating people. I'm going to bring that straight into my home, which is the hardest place of all, and I can teach that from personal experience. People are closest to you, that becomes, in your emotions get involved, you suddenly tend to forget all your self-protection and de-escalation. You've done really well against dealing with strangers and work colleagues and all the rest of it, but then you get back home, it's like, oh no, de-escalation suddenly goes out the window. So learning those kind of things. But when you have the physical skills, you have that straight line. Now, often I'll have clients, if they do self-protection, I'll go, well, what do you want to do next? And say, well, it's pointless. Unless you want to do a weapons course or something very specific to self-protection, and the course will already be bespoke, then what do you want to do? I say, well, I enjoy this. I enjoy the combative aspect of it. There's nothing wrong with that, I enjoy violence. Ooh. Let's be straight. What are you doing? It says, honestly, I used to go to a martial arts class, and they used to go for a drink afterwards. They never used to like talking about training, and it used to be like, well, why the hell are you here? Honestly, it was just like, honestly, it was just a shut the door activity for them. They might as well just been doing basketball or whatever. And
I was going to say, it comes back to that whole argument of like the volleyball after class. It's like, well, if you're framing your martial art or your self-protection course as the hard work, as the hard graft, and then you're rewarding it by doing something else, then you've got completely wrong end of the stick.
Exactly. So back to say the single objective path. So my view was like, okay, well, do martial arts. And so my view is like, do martial arts. And see, martial arts are a lifelong endeavour. So like you can do as much, and we can do, and I do cross training. So we'll work towards a path towards MMA. And the best way to do that is often to start with boxing, go into kickboxing, to Muay Thai, to wrestling, to submission grappling. Then to start doing MMA and divide up MMA into shoot boxing and ground and pound, etc., etc. So we can do all those kind of things. We could do that. We could run along those lines. But here's the thing: if you want to do it for your self protection, you do your boxing course, and then you go back to your self protection and you go to self defense skills. And what should happen is that now that palm strike you learn is pretty good. Why? Because you've just done God knows how many straight rights in a boxing class against somebody who knows how to defend straight rights and gives them back to you, and you've done it against the bag and all the rest of it, and all you just have to do is read it. You don't go back in and go, okay, well now I'm going to start standing in a boxing stance and I'm going to start fighting like a boxer and do the to and fro dynamic of boxing. You're going to keep to the same thing with self-protection, but now you're enhanced, just as you would be from doing good calisthenics and doing good resistance training and doing good cardio and all those kind of things, which should enhance your self-protection, because they do, and that's that part of it. That's how cross-training should be treated. It shouldn't be treated as a well-done, like let's mix all the styles together, let's do that. It's not that, it's an experience that you get from it. And even actually when you get into the martial arts themselves, you start discovering how bespoke they all are. Boxing has so many different styles. There's Soviet boxing, Cuban boxing, Ukrainian boxing, if you like, which actually all stem from the same sort of system, the Soviet boxing. Then you've got the British style, then you've got the American style, and then you've got the individual gyms. You've got Brendan Ingles' style of boxing in Britain, which is totally different you'll find to the Peacock Gym style of boxing. Then you've got the Peekaboo, and you've got the Philly Shell, and you've got all these kind of things like that. And a lot of time, there's a lot of debate describing, is there really a boxing guard? Or is it not just transitions of where you put your hands? Because the idea of having a guard is you have a fixed position. It should be a dynamic. So I think it's all more of a living dynamic thing than what people would take in consideration.
I think that's really interesting. I haven't really thought about this until you said it, but other people have talked about it in the past, I'm sure. I think Ian talks about this, and one of the things that he says, and I'll tie this back in, is that like if he ever finds that somebody's made Ian Rue, then it's not good. He knows that he's failed his thing. So it's interesting, you talk about quarrying techniques and stuff, so you can see where these kind of like peekaboo style comes from, and all this. Because the instructor that's teaching it was really good at it, and he was like, oh, okay, I'm good at this, so all my students should be. Whereas I think it's a more healthy dynamic to go, right, here's how I do it. Here's some other options too. I want you to find your own way. And I think there's not as many places that do that. In terms of how they teach.
And it's a great point, because that does go into one of the big problems with martial arts. It's the simple fact, and you'll find this is often there's a representation of that you'll find with katas and patterns and forms and whatever else, that people want to put their own expression on it, and they capture it within the kata or the form like that. And it gives you an experience. It gives you a chance just to have a feel for that. Which again, but as you say, brings it back to the line. But peekaboo is a great example of that. It's an incredibly rare style. Very, very few people do it. It's very, very few boxers actually do it. Mike Tyson was the perfect storm because of his shape. Purely because of his shape. And Customato had refined it. He taught Floyd Patterson the style, but what people tend to forget is that Floyd Patterson abandoned it. He took him to World Championship, but when he lost the title for the first time, he actually moved away from Customato in many respects and incorporated other aspects that enabled him to win the championship back. He had to readapt to it and things like that. Now, does that mean the peekaboo style is, and some people will go, these are the disadvantages of it. Peekaboo style is incredibly limited, incredibly strict style of fighting. It actually defies all the rules of boxing. You don't stand in a bladed stance, you stand in a square stance. And to make up for this, you need constant head movement. And the head movement slipping is different to a lot of the other boxers ones, which incorporate shoulder rolls and stuff like that. High guard, head movement side to side, and lots of angled stepping and stuff like that. It suits certain builds and certain people. Example with being with Mike Tyson. And a lot of time that is kind of the issue. But does that mean that it can't be beneficial to us? You know, Stuart, you're typically the wrong build for a peekaboo fighter. But if you learn aspects of peekaboo, you would say, okay, well, I can understand angles though. Angles are universal. But by learning that shift step that you do in a peekaboo style, that's going to help you. You'll learn that part of it. The idea of keeping your head mobile all the time, the very American style of doing that, that's very peekaboo, and that can kind of then go into other way. It doesn't mean that you then take the whole peekaboo style, but it means by having that experience from it, you now can use that to work into other stuff, which is how styles have all evolved. The cross arm guard becomes the Philly shell, etc., etc. You know.
I think that's exactly how we should go about training people, though, and it's how we should go about our own teaching, is our own training. Sorry, because you should be trying to make things work for you, not, this is how they do it, therefore I should be doing it exactly the same as them. And, me and Pat find this when we train, that, Pat will spar in a different way than I spar. Which is, I'm not going to, so Pat's been training with me for a long time now, but I would never turn around and go, no, you can't fuck it that way.
No, exactly.
It's bang out of order. Like, don't get me wrong, like, there's obviously ways that I could be like, hey, listen, this is how I do it. And I like to think this is how I actually teach. You can tell me if I'm wrong. You can call me out on the podcast right now if I don't. But like, I'd like to think, he's getting ready. I can see it in his face.
You're a bully, heretic. For those listening, please know that that's an inside joke that we will not explain. No, I completely agree. It's much more of like, if you want to use the phrase, like it's an ecological progression of like, you're not this kind of drill sergeant style of this is exactly how it must be done and any deviation is false. It's a case of you understand that there's people of different shapes and sizes and genders and just basic skill sets in your dojo, in your club. Yeah. And I've had a very similar experience training with you, Jamie, of like, it's not a case of like, right, everyone's in their lines and everyone's doing the same technique. It's a case of, no, this guy needs specific help with his takedowns, so we're going to focus on like, we can still do the same games, we can still be doing the same class. It doesn't become one class for 6 people, it still becomes a class of 6. Yeah. But it's very much like, okay, no, you need to make sure that you're taking the leg in this way, you need to make sure you're getting your head up into the shoulder when you do this takedown. Conversely, you need to make sure that your center of gravity is a lot lower, and it's a really good pickup of like actually working with the individual, working on the individual. This quarrying metaphor comes into play really obviously in the training session.
So you find that exactly, and I find that by things like, the simplest way I taught footwork was the old way of teaching footwork, and I do have to do aspects of this sometimes with my sculpting, if you like. Sure. So okay, and then we're talking now within a martial arts perspective here. Okay, not self-protection. Okay, but it's to make people go forward, go backwards, go to the right, go to the left, and pivot. Right? Okay, simple, very simple. That's very basic footwork. I know there's other examples. There's cross stepping and all the rest of it. They've got all those kind of things. How about this? You step on my feet, and I'll try and step on yours.
Yeah. Simple.
Yeah, exactly. And how does that not teach you about range? How does that not teach you about? It's quite simple. If I can step on your feet, I can punch you. Okay. If you can't step on my feet, you can't reach me. So best of all, you get your feet there, and your punch is going to be more effective. You're not going to lean and overbalance. You'll learn that yourself through ownership, through doing those kind of things. So sometimes it's good to do the game, then do the game again, and do the game regularly, and make it a regular part of your practice. Absolutely. Rather than just being this sort of novelty thing of going, oh, this is like this and like that. So often I bring it back in, and I make especially my experienced clients, I make them do that. So just keep remembering this, get your feet there, because sometimes it's just remembering simple things along those lines. If you can stop someone from touching your shoulders in a game of shoulder tag, then my God, it's easy to make them stop be hitting your head, isn't it? Exactly. So it's, and again, safe games, very safe, very low risk injury games, but teaching fundamental skills for full contact fighting. And Cubans love it. Cuban boxing, they love that kind of stuff. So you kind of again, a lot of it I often find out as a teacher as well. It's your job. Just so you're talking about like different techniques and different people. It's your job, being the person of authority, to know about all the different ways that you can do different things. Sure. But also to have the if you like, not to have the arrogance to know you know everything. So therefore you're looking at feedback from your students and clients. So you create games so that they find stuff and you go, that's actually working for you. That works well. It's like, so for ages you might be telling somebody, why you why are you doing that? That's not a good idea. And you go, oh, actually, it does work for me. I mean, Jeff Thompson used to love telling me about the Rocky Marciano's about I'm trying to remember. His coach, his name was it? Anyway, but Mickey Goldman from Rocky is based on it anyway. Usually when I'm doing my podcast, I've got my notes there. I've actually got it scripted. So, but anyway, he said Marciano's Sweet Susie Q, which is a short overhand right. Yeah. Okay. He was going that at the time. Technically, there was no punch listed in boxing for that. Yeah. Didn't exist. The overhand technically didn't exist, even though loads of boxers were using it.
Sure. And
he was going, it's not really there, Rocky. And he goes, well, I've knocked out all my opponents. Well, we better keep it in then. Exactly. If you look at fighters like Gene Fullmer back from the day, he did a weirdest guard. And again, I saw somebody doing a really good podcast arguing about guards in boxing to say, do they really exist? Or are they just not adaptations that people have made for how they fight? Because they always have to be dynamic. And Gene Fullmer had a very weird reverse cross-arm guard where he put his left hand in front instead of his right hand in front for a cover. That's really good for an audio medium, I know. Okay, but he did it because he set up this ridiculous jab which was thrown like a hammer fist. If you look at him, Gene Fullmer's jab is not a jab as you would conventionally call it. No. It's actually a hammer fist. It's like a downward punch. And he did this really big overhand right. And that's generally how he used to fight. Worked well for him, got him to the middleweight championship of the world, got him defeating Sugar Ray Robinson twice in their career and drawing once. Admittedly it was towards Robinson's end of his career, but yes, it worked for him. So different things. Again, it's like finding that ownership. Again, back to our view about being a teacher. Yeah. You need to have that broad range. So you have to say, well, you know what, this doesn't work for me, but I still know how to teach it. Yeah, I still know how to teach it, and you've got to be honest, because it's your job as a teacher. You're not a student anymore. And in this goes even more in self-protection, because the person who comes to you with self-protection is an individual, obviously, and I've got a thing about general self-protection. I'm beginning to move away from the concept that there actually is a thing as general self-protection. You can do a bit of an introductory seminar on what self-protection essentially means. Probably takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I only know that because I've just done one. Okay. But after that, it has to start getting specific. Because if people can't find relevance to the self-protection, they're not going to use it. They have to find direct relevance who you're talking about, who you're talking to, who's their most likely threat. If you start talking to somebody about, if you start talking to, typical secretary worker, if you like, or a female, to genderise this, if there's female secretary worker and say, like, okay, what you're going to be dealing with is a socially violent situation where a bloke's going to line you up in a bar and he's going to try and throw you a right cross and stuff like that. It's very unlikely those situations are going to happen. In terms of our society, that doesn't happen like that. You start talking to them about Handsy Mike near the water cooler, okay, who likes getting a bit tactile and works on the insidious assault. That has relevance. Yeah. But then you start talking to Gary, who always has a good night to have a nice drink on a Friday night, stereotypical sort of thing here, we're going here like that. He's more concerned about this person who's going to line him up in the bar like that, and less about Handsy Mike near the water cooler. Okay, just unfortunately sexist, but unfortunately it's not sexist, it's genderised. It's what happens within our society. The likelihood of just certain things, and you have to make things more specific. And a lot of the time, you need to be feeding this back, from statistics. Yes. So you've generally got some concrete information, but also feedback from clients. To know what they're doing. But for self-protection, we need to be open. We need to have this huge pool, because whoever we're teaching, we're going to have to be very, very specific. But we've got to understand that there's this massive area in order to be able to cover and work from that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jamie. If our listeners want to come looking for you, whereabouts can you be found?
Okay, well, the main hub is clubbchimera.com. So that's CLUBBCHIMERA.com. So that's the main hub, and you'll find all the links to the social media on there. I'm on Facebook, don't really hang out much at all on X, But YouTube, I have regular things. I have my podcast, obviously Jamie Clubb's podcast, for other imaginatively named. I'm on Instagram, and occasionally I've been trying to break TikTok, but and failing miserably.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, generally. But that's the general thing. And my blog is updated. I write every single lesson I teach. Every single lesson I teach has a report on the blog.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Jack, whereabouts can we find you?
You can find me in a lot of places. So you can also find me on our website, which is www.cotswoldkarateschool.com. But you can also find us on the Instagram page for the Armchair Combatants podcast, which is just Armchair Podcast, which you should be able to find nice and easily on our Instagram. So if anybody wants to request a topic, quite easy, just DM us and we can quite happily have a look and see if we want to do it next time. Pat, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Good Medicine Martial Artist, but I am also paying special attention to the official podcast Insta, as we are already compiling topics for our season 2. So if you want to have your say, if you want to be part of any of our question and answer episodes, please make sure you get in touch with us and we will do our best to get everything answered. Thanks again, Jamie. Thanks again, Jack, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, it's been an honour and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.